Jax Does Homestuck is a self-indulgent podcast featuring a heart player encouraging you to be self-indulgent too. Welcome home. So, welcome back to Jax Does Homestuck. We are doing another Fanstuck episode today. I am here with Callum, who I have talked before on previous Fanstuck episodes and probably previous other episodes. Callum is the author of Stargate Alternia. Callum, you want to introduce yourself, say your pronouns and stuff?
I don't really have any decision on that made yet. So, but yeah, I am Callum Traveler. I write Stargate Alternia, also called Stargate Stuck by some people, apparently. That blew my mind hearing that people actually call it that, but it makes sense. I do Tagari's voice on the Friends and Fandub, which hopefully we'll be getting to eventually. But yeah, I grew up playing the Myst games and watching Stargate and all sorts of other anime, and it eventually I got to doing this idea of Stargate and Stargate Homestuck, and it's what I'm doing now, and it's over 1.5 million words. How the heck did I get over 1.5 million words?
Yeah, that's something we're all asking. Like, it's crazy. It is crazy good, but it's crazy.
Oh yeah, it's just it astounds me looking at it, because I mean I can just literally go to the literal thick listing in it. Let me see what the actual word count is at the time of us recording this, just because I'm literally curious. It says 1,560,161 words.
Wow. Yeah.
That if there anyone listening to this far in the future looking back, that is at the current point of chapter 15 being posted on Act 6, Act 4. So that's a lot of words.
That's a lot of words.
it's just gonna be more words.
Yeah. So that's crazy. So by the name we can tell that it is a mixture of Stargate and Homestuck, but you have a lot of other stuff wrapped up in it too. So tell me a little bit about I guess the premise and what other franchises you have all up in there.
All right. So first and foremost, I mean, yeah, it's Stargate and Homestuck. It's there in the title. But the first thing I really majorly crossed over into it is a video game called Abduction. It's done by the same people who did the Myst games, Cyan Worlds. So it's basically, you're going camping, and then suddenly this big alien artifact comes and approaches you and takes you away to another world, which I'm not going to go too much into that, but there's a whole plot story element there. I've actually literally cut out the main abduction gimmick. That's spelled Obduction, not AB, because it's the word abduction is like to cut something out in a circular shape, and it's a whole thing in the game. But anyway, the main thing I borrowed from Abduction is the alien races. So you've got the Villian, who ended up being my main enemy antagonist in the Alternia Galaxy. I just called it the Alternia Galaxy because that was the only thing I could come up with at that point. Then there's the Villian, which are a race of big, giant, four-armed, kind of brute-looking guys who really kind of sweet, all things considered, and they just the way they talk is just out of your range of hearing. Those guys, the Villian, only show up a few times, but they're there. I had them show up because I needed some background filler. And then the main group that I really wanted to use in Abduction are the Arai. They're Okay, so imagine these big giant barnacle polyps that grow on a wall or something. Those are like eggs, and then they hatch into these little beetles. I say little, but they're basically beetle wasp hybrids. And at the time I was writing the story, I thought they were like no bigger than a house cat, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But then looking up at some of the official artwork and references and stuff, and they're huge. They're like actually as tall as an actual person from head to tail. So that's kind of a little it's like Portal 2. You know how you have the personality core floating in front of you and you think, oh, this thing's only yay big. It's like you can easily hold this in your hands. And then you look at the actual third person perspective of how big that personality core is next to you, and it's as big as your torso.
Yeah.
And it's like the perspective scale kind of throws you off a bit there. But anyway, so the Arai beetles also have this third form that are called polyarchs, that are the big matrons, and they're even bigger than the beetles. Like the Arai beetles look like little tiny kittens compared to the mama polyarchs, and the polyarchs are kind of like these sentient mind-linked creatures, kind of. But basically the polyarchs are the really sentient ones with all the, you know, the inbuilt personalities and stuff, and the beetles are kind of more like extensions of those wills of theirs. They're like, so like you have your big body, and then instead of having your hands and feet and stuff, you got just a whole swarm of beetles and stuff. And so the idea I had there with bringing them into the mix was the Worm web novel serial. So the main character there is Taylor, and she gets these psychic mind control powers that lets her control huge swarms of insects, and basically it's like a swarm bringer for all of these giant insects. And I was like, I want to have something like that. So I have Joey going in and training under one of these polyarchs to be able to control these swarms of Arai beetles. And so she just goes around in the story for the first few acts with this whole swarm of Arai beetles held in her Sylladex. And so whenever the time comes, she just opens the box, and out comes this swarm of flying beetle wasps.
Yeah.
And again, I had them super tiny to begin with, so I have little descriptions of them like landing on her head or shoulders. And in retrospect, now I'm like, oh god, that is not possible at all. But I'm just keeping them small and cute because I've literally written most of the story with them like that, so they're staying like that now. Something else that I have Worm as an inspiration for that, and it kind of extended into this other thing. So, in the Pokemon Sun and Moon series, they have these things called Z-Rings that are like these big old bracelets, and then you put a crystal on them. And the toys for that have extra slots on them. So you could like put on 7 crystals onto one of those bracelets. And I have one of those bracelets, and I ended up collecting enough of those crystals, and that it ended up being this sort of rainbow pattern. And I was like, oh, this is like the Hemo Spectrum. I literally had 1 crystal for each color, basically. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to do a bit of Worm, and I'm going to do a bit of Homestuck here. And I made this bracelet that existed that have the psychic powers of the Alternian cast. So you've got the red crystal that does the psychic communion with the dead. You have the orange crystal, which lets you commune with animals and other stuff. And then there's the yellow crystal, which is Hyper Beam, and you can probably guess what it does. It's Solix's High Blasts, and boy, have I gotten a lot of mileage out of Hyper Beam. The original Hyper Beam crystal is the only crystal that's actually survived the entire story so far. But yeah, so the next crystal is Administration, and that's the one that's heavily based off of Worm. It's the lime green crystal, and it was the one that the Arai Polyarch had, and it was training Joey with to use. And so when the bracelet ends up getting destroyed and the bracelet and the crystals kind of shatter, Joey ends up with a bunch of admin shards stuck on her chest, basically. Like it embeds into her flesh. And so the powers of the crystal then get permanently embowed to her. So even though the bracelet at this point of the fic is like technically long gone, the powers from it are still around. And that same thing happens with all the other crystals. But yeah, the next ones were Jade Green, which is rejuvenation. You know, the whole the Jade Bloods having their Rainbow Drinker power-ups. Then the next crystal is Regent, the Cerulean crystal, and it's mind control. You know, it's just casual mind control on a little crystal. And then the final crystal is the most important one, which is another worm reference. It's Shaper. It's the pink crystal, the fuchsia pink crystal, and it lets you basically reshape genetic structures on the fly just by touching somebody and thinking of what you want to do. And Shaper is a little troll in a crystal, and it's basically the thing that triggers off a whole bunch of things, and I'll get to that later when I talk about Joey a bit more. But it's like so you have this whole bracelet of crystals, and that's kind of a hybrid of worm and Pokemon in its own right. It's mostly worm, but it's kind of Pokemon, and just the whole center of the bracelet itself, that the solid base of it is the final power, and it's super strength, you know, Equius super strength.
Yeah.
So that's basically all the powers wrapped up into one, and I made it this MacGuffin artifact that okay, so there's this process of how the heiress challenges the current empress and becomes, you know, the new empress, and it involves this bracelet. The new heiress gets the bracelet, puts it on, gains the powers of the entire race, and then uses it to challenge the current empress. And years and years and years ago, like well before even Stargates got included in the Alternia galaxy long ago, you know, her imperial condescension got a hold of this bracelet, and she decided, you know what? I do not want anyone else getting their hands on this. And the long story short is she ended up breaking the bracelet into its component parts and spread them across the galaxy, creating this fetch quest for the heroes to do as they're trying to get all the pieces back together and make the bracelet again before Triza can do it, because Triza totally wants the bracelet so she can go and challenge the Empress again. And Triza, well, at the early part of the story, she's Triza, and she's not all that nice, you know. I mean,
yeah.
So other than that, I mean, I have like references to various other things, like Ruby. I have Ruby Rose and Penny Polendina being referenced in the story in various ways. And I'll reference, you know, I've referenced Sword Art Online. Oh, actually, Sword Art Online isn't even really a reference. I mean, it kind of technically is, but so the main idea with that is parallel dimensions. Basically, the stuff that happens in the game is its own real world. There's backstory reasons that they exist, and basically, I have characters from Sword Art Online being actual characters in the story, because even though they're not actually specifically from the Sword Art Online timeline, if that makes any sense. So it's like, just for example, I have Keiko Ayano and Silica, who are in Sword Art Online, the same character, the same person, just one's an avatar, one's the player, and they are two separate people. They're basically twins, except one's a cat, one's a wolf, and they you know, they interact with each other in this whole massive convoluted timeline that's shown up. And then the last major thing, I mean, besides Power Rangers, I mean, Power Rangers is like, I have Megazords and whatnot everywhere. The last major thing that I've added to the whole crossover setting is the Myst universe. And Myst, like I said, I grew up on the Myst games, and having them in this whole vast, messed up, crazy world is gives me so many fun little toys to play with, because how else do you have this moment of being able to open a book and look at the linking panel and have Joey watching as Atlantis hurtles towards a meteor shower, and there's then then they send out all the ships to blow up the meteor so the Atlantis can travel through a hole in the asteroid belt, and that's That's honestly something that is the very start of Act 6, Act 4. So, spoilers, sorry. But it gives me such a fun little visual cue to work with, and it lets me play off the narrative structure more because Stargate and Homestuck are such inherently visual mediums, and all of these stories, all of these other things that I'm working together are inherently visual. My way of writing is basically I write it as it would be novelized from a TV show, not like a script format, but it's like with the action sequences when I do the pseudo flash sequences, I have the music playing. I have a link to a music track, and then I have little number tags telling people when a certain point in the music is timed with the text. And so when I have this visual medium like this, these visual mediums that I'm mushing together in this text format, I have to play it out differently. And so having these fun little ways of being able to look at the story differently. Like there are times where I want to use a certain cutscene from the actual episode, like you see two ships exiting hyperspace over a planet. How do you have that? How do you show that when you're mainly sticking to the second person narrative most of the time? I do really break into the third person narrative and the first person on very rare occasions. But for the most part, the story is strictly second person, like Homestuck is. So how do I show these visual moments in a way that the characters can understand it, Like if I'm having this perspective from, say, Daria sitting in the Atlantis control room, how do I have her aware of a ship exiting hyperspace? Well, I say there's a camera and a satellite that's in orbit and it's watching as the ship comes out of hyperspace. Mm-hmm. But then there are also other times where the limited narrative works so much better because the end of Act 6, Act 3 is the end of Season 3 for Atlantis, where the replicators come and they shoot this laser down at Atlantis. And so I was thinking, okay, instead of showing that from the satellite's perspective, because they did that in the show, I want to do this more from the character's perspective. So I have Ruby Zaolon, an Alternian version of Ruby Rose, go out onto a balcony, and I have her look up at the sky as this big red line just sort of carves into the air. And then as she's watching, the line just sort of bends to kind of come down through the horizon. Because, like planets are curved. And so the line, even though it's a straight line, the curvature of the planet and the way that the satellite is turning towards the city, it causes the laser to turn into this curved line that suddenly straightens out as it starts coming towards the city. And it just grows larger and larger and larger. And then it crashes against the shield over the city. And it's such a powerful moment because in the show you just see the laser satellite turn the laser towards the city, and then you cut to the laser already cutting across the ocean to hit the shield. But it feels like there's this more powerful moment of impact to be able to have that perspective of the character looking out at the laser as it comes hurtling towards the city, Mm-hmm. So being able to have these different ways of visually selling these various moments it's really a fun way of making this work, because I want to have these moments where I can have these vast, cinematic moments. But how do I frame it in this narrative? So being able to have stuff like Myst and have the linking books, or have the Arai beetles, which I can have Joey just place one on the corner of a wall and just, be like a security camera looking through it, watching things. Or early on, even once she had control of them, I had her send one of her little beetles to one of her teammates and just kind of message them with it, like buzzing wing saying, "Hey, I want to talk, come talk to me," basically, So being able to have these moments of the visual stuff, tying it all together, is really, it's really kind of fun. I mean, at this point, it's somehow cohesive, all smushed together. and it's really amazing that it's this long and it's this cohesive, just because I've mashed everything together. But honestly, I think that helps because a lot of Stargate and Homestuck, and of course a lot of these other stories, usually deal with the same themes in their own way. Like I can take the elements from one story and use them to affect another. So you've got time travel, and you got revolution and alternate dimensions and found family, and you got characters transitioning from one state in their life to another. You got romance, alternate and otherwise. You got people dealing with their traumas, with other selves, with dealing with extra voices inside their head. And it all just comes down to this whole sense of, I had no idea what the hell just happened, but it was awesome. It's just that, there's no really other way to describe it. It is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's you managed to weave all these different, just wildly different series together, because like you said, they do have a lot of similar themes. So you use it to your advantage, and you explore a lot of what alternate selves mean, and what identity is in general. And it's definitely really neat. But real quick, so let's back up and talk about the premise of it, because you mentioned Joey. So this whole thing takes place primarily, well, it goes from the perspective of like a lot of different characters, but Joey is basically the main protagonist, which is, we don't see that a lot in Homestuck fanfics right now. We don't see a lot of Joey as the protagonist. So what's kind of the setup for it?
Okay, so how I came up with the idea originally was, I was writing this thing post Hive Swap Act 1. It was just a short intermission fic. And it was basically just, the idea was Joey and Zephyro start chilling out in a abandoned hive, waiting for the sun out. And then somewhere in there, I made a remark about the Alternian version of the movie Stargate, because, giant circular portal devices are a thing. Yeah. And then a reader said, I would totally read a crossover between Homestuck and Stargate. And that got me thinking. And so basically, I watched the first movie, the very first movie that started it all. And I was like, I'm not sure I really want to do this all the way. So I did this short little this prequel, basically this Act Zero thing that had, that basically was just like, okay, what is the main points that initially ties all this together? How can I merge these two concepts together in the most basic of ways? And the thing that got me was, Jake Harley leaves his home when he's 16, and and as far as my math worked out at that point in time, I thought, oh my gosh, he's 18 and he's out on his own when they're digging up the Stargate in Giza. So I have him there at that inciting incident at the very start of the movie, basically, where they're pulling the Stargate up out of the sand. And then that whole act was basically me kind of weaving Jake into the Stargate narrative, but the pieces, like I was just starting to take two different puzzle boxes and take the pieces. And I'm like, these pictures go together. I start interweaving this core narrative through it. And then I got to the point where Jake has Joey, and where Jake and Miss Claire have Joey. And then later on, Jude, and I ambiguously leave it in the void as to how the mother died. But at that point, I'm like, okay, I know how I'm doing this if I actually go through and do this. And so the idea was, while Jake and the main cast of SG-1 basically go to Abydos and do the movie before SG-1 is a series, as a thing, I cut back and forth between the movie plot and the Earthside plot, because I had Jake bring Joey and Jude to the SGC, and I had them present when they actually get the Stargate to work for the first time. And I have them watch it, and I have them recognize what it is. And then, so when Jake goes through the Stargate, Joey, idles in Jake's office, and she opens up a safe and she finds a whole bunch of pictures and stuff, like the picture, like this one picture that starts off basically every Sable time loop in the story is Joey opens up the safe and she looks at a bunch of folders and stuff. She finds this picture of Jake having sneaked into his mother's bedroom closet and peeking out through a gap in the door with a camera. And he took a picture of Condi at the Condess as she's, putting on her makeup and she's making herself look human. And she's kind of in this halfway state of looking Alternian and human. And I'm realizing now that that's completely extra of Condi because she has the ability to literally make herself look human at that point of the story. But she doesn't do it. She just uses makeup to do it. Oh my God, Condi, how extra can you be? Yeah. But anyway, so then basically at that point I have Joey go to, Burger King or something, some restaurant. And then the General Hammond, he shows up and he has this letter that he received as part of a time loop. And he gives her a piece of a message that was written by Jude, a future version of Jude. And he gives it to her, and she recognizes, because she's seen the Stargate now, she recognizes Stargate glyphs for what they are. She recognizes it is a gate address, and it's a very specific gate address. So once Jake and company return home from Earth, having blown up, the Supreme System Lord Ra, who actually was Condi, who took Ra, ripped his symbiote out of him, and ate him because she's extra like that. And so basically, after Jake killed his own mother, basically with a nuke, so then the official consensus comes down that Jan Betty Crocker is now dead. We now need to have a wake at her old mansion down in Florida. And so Jake ends up dragging his kids down there, and of course Condi's minions, her Goa'uld minions, come along and they attack the place like the monsters in Hive Swap did. And so she ends up finding this Stargate, this hodgepodge handmade Stargate just in the attic. And she has to use the Stargate to dial out to Alternia and escape. And so basically it recreates the whole plot of Hive Swap Act 1, but then it puts this whole twist on it, having the Stargate in place of the Cherub portal. And so Joey gets flung to a whole other galaxy where she then crashes into a crate where that was left there. And Zephyros and Damek were in the process of trying to make their Stargate secure and safe so that it could be used as a weapon against Condi. And out comes Joey crashing into their plans and upsetting everything. And it just kicks off the whole story. And it's basically then the story jumps back and forth between the two sides of things as the story progresses. And but Joey is the main instigator of everything that happens in the Alternia galaxy because of everything that happened in the movie Stargate, culminating in her being in an attic, of a house that's being attacked. And so she ends up getting flung to a whole other galaxy in an attempt to escape. And so because she has that picture of Condi, she realizes then that there's eventually she'll realize that there's some sort of time shenanigans going on here, because how can the Condus be in two places at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so basically that's the whole point of it is just Joey ends up in all of this. She ends up being the light that sparks this rebellion into a proper rolling revolution, and how light has this, the light aspect has this balance to luck with it, like how Vriska is always talking about luck in Canon Homestuck, about bad luck and good luck and all that. So, and how she can steal that luck, that light, that relevance from other people. So light and luck have this weird balance to it in Canon Homestuck. So as luck would have it, after events happen and Teresa absconds out of there, and her ship, which, I called the All Your Base, because meme. So all your base crashes into a desert, crashes through a couple of abandoned frog temples because, this is a no suburb AU. And so the ship happens to crash land near enough to a hidden cloister, not just of Jade Bloods and their own Mother Grub, but rather a whole bunch of adults and kids of Alternian who in years past had come to this tavern, hid themselves away before all the adults were kicked off Alternia. So they've just been chilling out in this one little cave in the desert for thousands of years, basically. And so eventually that's where Dariah and all the Jade Bloods from Hive Swap get pulled into it but at that point, we didn't have the troll call yet. We didn't even have names for most of these, let alone personalities. We didn't even know they were a thing that was going to be happening at that point of the story. So I'm kind of dealing with a bunch of OCs, because I'm like, and the only character I have that's in that group, that is that initial group of main characters that isn't from Hive Swap and isn't an OC is one of the trolls from the original Kickstarter, one of the two trolls that people spend an absurd amount of money on, Mir Ferdurgus. She ends up being part of the main crew, the main cast. Because at that point in time, I was expecting, oh, she's going to be in the game. I'm going to be clever and place her in the story before she's in the game, And
yeah.
and we all know how that's been 2 years later.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when I was writing this story originally, I had a whole bunch of initial ideas for how Hive Swap. I was trying to predict Hive Swap and kind of play my story off of it. Like we had during the Kickstarter development, we had pictures of this one little beekeeper troll, and she looked so adorable. And of course, she didn't end up in the game. She ended up being replaced by Zebedee, apparently, even though her sign went to Kupram, I think. But so anyway, you have these trolls. So I have this ambiguous character in the background, like I was expecting, okay, I'm gonna refer to her as Hivekeep. I'm gonna have this beekeeper troll be a central character, even though she's off screen as a radio voice most of the time. And then events got all confuddled, and I basically was like, okay, I have to make her into an OC now, I guess. Because it's like, pseudo canon, just pseudo canon, almost there. I was like, the main funny thing about this whole story, as I've developed it over the years, is like I have these initial plot threads. When I first started out, I had these small initial little plot points at big milestones. I was like, okay, if I get to here, I'm going to do this thing. If I get to this point, I'm going to do that thing, and quite a few of them ended up derailed. But yeah, but is in this whole grand scheme of things, having Joey as the protagonist has been the main sort of through thread for the whole story, even though it starts off with Jake doing stuff. It's because he brought Joey to the SGC to watch all of this that she gets involved in all of this. And she basically becomes the heiress instead of Teresa, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make. Even because technically she is, the Empress's actual granddaughter in its own weird kind of twisted way of genetics and all that. So yeah, Joey basically is now the protagonist of the story. And even though she's finished off her main character arc in the story, I still have her bipping back through the story every now and then, just because she's still here, she's still relevant, she's still observing things, even though she's done everything she has to do. She has her own life. She has a mate spread and a Kissmissus, and they have a kid, and she has a Moirael, and he and her and Zephyros, her and Damek are all in this band, the Rebels, and they're doing music, and they have a life, and they're doing all this other, normal stuff in the background of the story at this point. But every now and then they still cross back over into the main narrative.
Yeah, no, there's a lot going on, and it's all very exciting because you so much time happens in the story that, yeah, they are able to grow up, do what they need to do, have kids or whatever they end up wanting to do, and just live their life. And other people become important in that time, and
Mhm.
you get to watch them grow and live. And it's very satisfying in ways that we as Homestuck fans desperately want. It's like we want good things to happen to these characters, even
Mhm.
though conflict is obviously necessary for stories to keep going
Mhm.
on. So why work on this? This is a big project. This is a lot. You have so many threads going on. What made you kind of start wanting to work on it? What made you keep working on this huge thing?
At first, it really was just okay, this was kind of cool. These puzzles or pieces are fitting together. When I did the first initial Act Zero, I'm like, okay, at the very least, I have enough here that I can do Stargate the movie. I have enough pieces here in these boxes to do Stargate the movie, an adaptation of it. And then once I was nearing the end of that and I was writing the scene as Joey gets sent to Alternia, I'm like, well, now I want to see how this turns out. Now that I've written to this point, I want to see how this turns out. I wanted to see how Joey's life turns out, how everyone else reacts at that point. And so I have to start conceptualizing all this stuff about the series Stargate SG-1, because for the first 8 years of Stargate SG-1, that's going to be my main, narrative bulk of stuff I can adapt into chapters, even if I don't do much with the Alternia side of thing, which I basically doubled the SG-1 series count at that point. So I'm going through all this, and so I'm starting to, as I'm going through it, once I'm in like Act 4, I'm like, okay, I'm in this at the very least to Act 5, Act 2, Because once I hit Act 4, I was like, okay, I know what I want to do for that ending of that act. And it was a big ending. I was like the most narratively, it's like the Cascade moment for Canon Homestuck, basically,
Yeah.
So then once I've hit that point, I'm like, okay, do I really want to do Atlantis? But or do I just want to end it here, Because it would have been a good narrative point to end it. But at the same point, I'd already done enough of the actual Atlantis story arc. I'd done the pilot episodes for Atlantis season 1. And I'm like, okay, you know what? What the heck is 6 more acts of this? I'm already so far in. I can just see this through to the end. And yeah, after that point, it's just I'm at Act 6, Act 4. I'm halfway through that in terms of writing it. I think I just finished writing the mid-season finale sequence, and oh my gosh, that is a sequence, all right. Too long, don't read, don't really want to spoil it. Big old beam of light crashing down onto a planet. That's vague enough, I think. and it's all set to I Wanna Be by the Stance Punks. It's the first ending theme to the Soul Eater anime, and it's like it's just this perfect sort of moment because it's kind of this sorrowful song mixed into this punk rap sort of thing, and it kind of is this melancholic undertone to this little sub arc in that episode that, even though I don't pay it too much attention or focus, it's still there. It's just the because it's this last minute desperation idea that's being put into play here by Tisius, and the fact that it works out is still at the cost of this weapon that got made and has the sentience to it, and it's happy to commit its purpose. It's happy to die destroying all of these other things, but it's still this sad moment because it does acknowledge it needs to do this. It doesn't matter how it feels about all of this. It needs to commit to this course of action and see it through, because otherwise more and more and more and more and more and more and more people are going to get hurt than if it sacrifices itself to stop it. And it's all this kind of melancholy sort of thing, but it's there, and it kind of plays out in that regard. But yeah, as it is, I've got Act 6, Act 5, which is going to be basically the game over version of this story. There's the movie Stargate Continuum, which is basically a whole time travel. Basically, Continuum is a doomed timeline because somebody went back in time like an idiot and changed events and caused things to go horribly wrong. And everybody basically dies because of it. And a few people go back in time to stop it. And so it's basically the game. It's basically the whole game over of that Act 6, Act 5. It's a doomed timeline focusing. And then Act 6 is going to be the last season of Stargate Atlantis, season 5. And then Act 7 is going to be this moment that I've been working on, that I've been alluding to every now and then, ever since the point in time where I actually exiled Condi back in time to, cause everything to happen in the first place. And that is this whole Giza in the ancient past, 3,000 years ago, 3,000 BC, technically, that 5,000 years ago. It's this whole loop that happened in late season 8 of Stargate SG-1. It was the actual season finale for season 8, but I decided I want to do things differently because there's also this Stargate SG-1 novel that takes place after the series that doubles back onto that loop. It's a Mobius double reach around, and I'm like, I need to do this. I need to take this episode and I need to do it as Act 7. It is the ultimate tie-up of all of these loose threads. It is the ultimate bow on the top of the story. It is just pure time shenanigans. And and that's basically all I have left to write at this point, is just 2.5 acts, 3 acts, I guess.
Yeah, that's crazy that you've been planning that for so long. You've just been sitting on it for how long have you been working on this? 2 years more?
Let me check. It says I started this. It says I first posted this Act 0, the very first thing, just one chapter, October 1st, 2017. It is October 20th, 2019 when we're recording this. So it has literally been over 2 years since I've started this.
Wow. Yeah, and yeah, you've had this planned for a very long time then. That's crazy. So throughout all this, I know you said you got good feedback on your first little blip that kind of led to all this, but what's been the reception for this whole huge thing?
Okay, so it really depends fic by fic, because sometimes I get like 10 comments per chapter count, and then sometimes I don't get like too many. Like I get a couple of chapters in a row where I don't get any response, but that's mostly been the late game, because at this point it's like everybody's said everything that needs to be said, but even then I still get the occasional comment. But overall it's been very, to put it kindly, and everyone's been very positive. It's the general reaction is, what? No, like what? Like that scene where David Tennant sees Catherine Tate having teleported onto the TARDIS in Doctor Who for one of the Christmas specials, and he's just like, what? That's basically the reaction in general I get, because I mean, people are like, oh wow, do you see this and that and that? But overall, it's that stunned kind of wow, what just happened sort of overall reception over this. I mean, a lot of people love it. I mean, especially with the topics like the epilogues, when I've touched on that, people have said, I'm really appreciative of what you've done here because you handled it so much better than the epilogues did. And what I did with Damara and her character arc, I've had people tell me, I am so glad you handled Damara the way you did, because God, did Hussie do her dirty. And it's like, so I have all these, I have people telling me that they really like these chapters when they reply to it.
Yeah. So in relation to your work and how it's 1.5 million words in 2 years, which sure, that's 2 years, but if you look at some of the timestamps on your stuff, like you're updating really regularly. So there have been questions of how you have gotten through so many things. Like Homestuck is 10 years old and has less words than you.
It has less words than me, even including the epilogues.
Yeah, epilogues are what pushed it over 1 million words. And you have gone way past that. So what's your kind of writing schedule like? Like how often do you post updates?
Early on, I was kind of shotgunning it every single day, which is insane to think about. And it's like, after a while, that was not manageable for me. I had to stop posting on weekends. But after a certain point, my schedule ended up kind of shifting to the point where it's like, okay, I'm going to post tomorrow's chapter today. So my Monday chapter goes up on Sunday, and I wait until AO3's internal server time clicks over to the next day to post it. And having this time window of having it ready like a few hours in advance gives me time to go through it a couple times and spot some more errors. So I've been doing Monday through Friday, technically Sunday through Thursday, for, I'm going to eyeball it, rough it, and say about a year now. I don't know exactly when I switched to doing that, but it's somewhere in there along that. Before that, I was just posting any time of day I could. Like I would write a chapter. I'd be like, this is good. I'm posting it. I'll go write the next chapter now. I wrote the next chapter. I post it. I write the next chapter. I post it. But then I started kind of getting ahead of myself a little. And then I started building up the buffer. And then I'm like, okay, I can hold this off a bit longer. And right now, I have about a week and 2 days worth of buffer ready to go through. And it gives me time to go back and get some other changes in if I need to. But like the last chapter I was writing that I was just talking about with the scene I just finished with the music sequence, I've been working off and on that for at least the last 3 days, and it's one of the longer chapters. Like if it's a short chapter, like 1 or 2 scenes, like usually I can crank out like a couple of chapters in a day, like of that, and that's. But then there's also like what I did for the Sam Jack wedding in the end of near the end of Act 6, Act 3, the unending Sunday episodes. Like if you go back to the Act 6, Act 3, look at the chapter drop down list, you'll see that it goes basically unending Sunday, unending Sunday, unending Sunday. Like it's a cup, like it's a gear that's kind of been laid flat with the little notches rising and falling in how it looks. And basically what I did there was I took what were going to be 2 very long chapters, and instead I just broke them up by act and posted them act by act, alternating between the episodes. Act 1 of SG1, Act 1 of Atlantis, Act 1 of SG1, Act 1, Act 1, Act 2, Act 1, Act 2, something like that.
For sure. And how long are your chapters usually? I know sometimes you have shorter chapters and sometimes longer ones. Like I know recently you had a couple of days in a row that were just like basically 10K each.
Oh my God. Like, okay. So like the last few chapters in Act 6, Act 4 have been some fairly short ones, but there have also been some long ones in between. Like Act 6, Act 4 at the moment is currently 41,000 words and some change. And the first initial 10,000 of that came from chapter 2, which is the actual first proper chapter that isn't a recap. It's SGA 0401 Adrift Part 3. That was 10K words, and it was the last chapter in that long 10K spree. I basically wrote 4 chapters in a row that were 10K words.
Yeah.
And so I ended up with 40,000 words of word count spread between the end of the last act and the start of the current one. And I basically didn't even realize I was writing that much when I was writing. I was like, okay, here's a short scene, here's a short scene, here's a short scene, here's a short scene, here's a short scene. And then I did one really long scene. And I think that's what really pushed me over on one of those chapters. But I basically just ended up writing a whole bunch of really short scenes that ended up getting so long that it was a whole episode worth of content. Like, ideally, I think if I could do it, I think about 10,000 words is about the right amount of adaptation room for a solid 45-minute episode of television, you know. Like doing an adaptation of a Stargate episode to text, I think that is about how it kind of works out, because you have to describe a whole lot of stuff that otherwise is handled by the VFX or is otherwise handled very simply in a script. But yeah, but usually when I'm writing the chapter's length, I just don't care about the length when I'm writing it. I just know this isn't done yet. This isn't done yet. This isn't done yet. Can I be done here? No. Yes. Okay. This isn't done yet. Okay. This is finally done. So the end of Act 6, Act 3 is, okay. Yeah. So I start with the part 1 of it, which is, Backdoor Negotiations 319. And that's 10K chapters. And it is basically a whole chapter about dealing with politics of the whole intergalactic alliance thing that's going on here. And a whole vast section of it comes from the part of the people who are trying to get in on this alliance. And they just came so well prepared that after they're done, I just have Jack sort of say, well, they came prepared, because that's really the only thing to say about it. And then what follows is this whole spiel about impossibly large numbers of in terms of scale, because I made a huge mistake early on in the story by not checking how big something was. I was just using the canon number, and I was just assuming, okay, this is a small thing in comparison to a planet Earth, you know? But actually, it's about the as big around as the planet Earth is in diameter. And that's like, how did I not realize that sooner? And so when I was writing this chapter and I said, okay, it's going to be 10 times bigger than this really big thing, I'm like, how do they have the math for that? And I just had my whole sequence of trying to rationalize how this works spelled out through the characters. Like, it was just this whole it's just this whole ramble of okay, so here's Jade. She speaks, what's worth the circumference of the Earth itself? It's 24,901 miles, or 40,075 kilometers, and the diameter is 12,756 kilometers at the equator. How did we not notice this before? And basically, she's comparing these real numbers to these other numbers that are stated from this source of fiction, and the whole thing is just, I have Jade say, this is so fucking ambitious. How the hell are they even making something like this? And I make it work in the story, but every character is just like, what the hell? They're just as flabbergasted as some of the readers are in response to it. And okay, so once all of that got sorted out, I then jumped to the next chapter, which, you know, but anyway, it basically is that episode with the laser. Basically, the replicators come and they send a big old beam of doom towards the. Here's the really fun thing about Act 6, Act 3. I was ready and waiting for this moment with a quote to use in the description of the story since I posted Act 6, Act 3. And then when I get to the point where the laser gets used, and I almost flub it, because the way I wrote the pacing of the scenes means I can't use it the way I wanted to. So I have to then sneak it sort of in a scene that's sort of following that, but in a few moments in the past, retroactively. It just, sometimes you just get so caught up in the flow of the writing that the things you have planned sometimes don't quite work out the way you expect.
Yeah,
it's insane how much I've gotten in this story.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. There's a lot. There's a lot I would love to talk about this, but I feel like we'd need a whole series just devoted to all the different.
Yeah, you know, at some point I'm just gonna have to go through and just do a director's commentary on this story. But that's gonna be another million words probably.
Yeah, because you touch on a lot of different topics, and we have this planned out in an outline, and there's so much here that I read through, and I'm like, yes, I would love to talk about all of these, but I feel like almost every single one of these would be another episode.
God, yes.
So let me just kind of run through, if anyone is curious what all topics this touches on, I'm just going to blurt out some words and we'll have those out there, and that'll be that. So we've kind of mentioned this before, but time travel, alternate dimensions, dealing with alternate selves, those are really important. They come up definitely a lot in Homestuck, definitely a lot in Stargate from what I know about Stargate, and very, very important. So if you like that part of Homestuck or Stargate, we have that, because you can't really do either one of these stories for any period of time without having time and self shenanigans.
Yeah.
We have the Revolution, which you've talked about before, and about, you know, Joey becoming basically the heiress and getting rid of Condi. And then on the Stargate side, dealing with how do you say it? The Gula?
The Gould. The Goa'uld.
The Gould. See, I don't say
the Goa'uld.
Yeah.
Yes. They joke about that in the show. There are some people say Gould. There are people who say, then immediately correct, Goa'uld. It's a whole joke in the series itself about the pronunciation on that.
Yeah, I just said letters that weren't even there whenever I tried to pronounce it. So that's how it works. This is a continuing series of me not knowing how to say things. Last time it was Tsundere. This time it's Gould.
Goa'uld.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we have found family and romance, which is obviously necessary for fanfics. Because found family is the best. Romance is great. And then a big one is transitioning, and you deal with it in a lot of different ways. There are trans characters. There are just briefly mentioning how Joey uses shapeshifter to become Alternian and ends up kind of preferring that. So while it's not dysphoria, I think dysmorphia is kind of the term for it.
Yeah, I think dysmorphia is probably the more correct term there in that case.
Yeah, and while we obviously don't go through quite as many like extraterrestrial experiences as Joey, a lot of it can be understood, and then you do have the actual trans rep in there to deal with that, especially with the introduction of alternate selves. And that kind of flows into dealing with trauma. You deal with a lot of trauma in there, which is only to be expected from what Homestuck and Stargate is. But instead of kind of hand waving it, like it actually gets sat down and dealt with a lot.
Stargate and Homestuck kind of wave it away by the time the next episode comes along.
And then another topic you deal with a lot is dealing with extra voices inside your head, which, from what I can understand, is kind of a big part of Stargate, but not necessarily touched on at the same time.
Yeah, basically, Stargate has these the Goa'uld. The Goa'uld symbiotes are alien parasites that go into a person's head, wrap around their spine, and kind of dig their head in their brain, and then they're kind of like body jacking parasites, you know. And, you know, they're generally the whole malevolent, ha, 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 I am the god, you will worship me, sort of shit, you know. But then there's the Tok'ra, who are the same species, but their mental philosophy over how they interact with hosts is all very different. Where the Goa'uld usually go through the back of the neck and leave a scar, the Tok'ra usually go in through the mouth, and it so that it doesn't leave a scar. And the Tok'ra are... they're like an extra head meat. I touched on kind of in the notes here that I made. It was kind of like the Tok'ra are kind of more like tulpas in the narrative way that they work. They they're able to access memories. There's a back and forth between the human host and the Tok'ra symbiote. There's literally conversation back and forth between them. They can share thoughts and all that. And the Tok'ra can take over the body if the host allows it. Like possession is a thing. So but they go back and forth, and because the story is a lot more of an internal narrative than a visual one, I can actually focus on that a lot more, because in Stargate you don't really get a character's thoughts. Like in Homestuck proper, you have the second narrative kind of laying out their thought and thinking process, but you don't really get that in a TV show. You don't get to hear what characters are thinking in Stargate. And the only time they actually do that in Stargate, where you have the two characters having a back and forth inside their head, is when it's not a Tok'ra. The sheer annoyance of it is they had a perfect opportunity to have a Tok'ra be on the base. They had to have two characters interact in their head like that. But then what really happened was there was an accident. Two characters got stuck in a transporter. And when the transporter malfunctioned, only one of them came out physically. The other one got their mind stuck in there. And so they have this back and forth, like how I envision the Tok'ra and host interactions go. But it's decidedly way more unstable. And then it has to be undone by the end of the episode. And so it's a whole thing that I really wish they'd touched more on in Stargate proper, but SG-1 was focused on SG-1, and when they had a chance to introduce a Tok'ra character, put them on the team, they killed Jolinar off in the first episode she was in. They used her memories as a plot point, for crying out loud, but I was like, she deserves so much better. Jolinar deserved better, so she survives, and more than survives, she gets temporarily cloned, so there are now two of her. So so I am able to I was able to end up exploring that a whole lot more consistently. Yeah,
and it's really neat. I mean, I'm focusing on stuff like this because I like the identity of noir and how that can change through all these various things, and having an extra voice inside your head would certainly mess with that. And so I really love when you explore stuff like that. And yeah, so those are kind of the main things. I hate to say the main things your story deals with, because it deals with
so much more. But this is like just the surface level of concept and stuff. Like I could go on for hours about how I dealt with all the epilogue themes and stuff, which I'll just say the epilogue preempted me on so many plot points. It felt like I was cheating. I had a roadmap to follow now, to build off of.
Yeah, I mean, it sometimes works out that way, and yeah, from what I hear and what but you've had me read for that, it seems like you did really great job working it all in.
I have a few very brief cameos and tie-ins from the actual epilogues, and a vast majority of that actually stems from Damara literally taking over the narrative for a chapter. And
yeah,
I could just talk for hours on some of this stuff. Like I said, director's commentary, I really need to go through and do that at some point.
Yeah, no, that would be freaking great. And okay, so while we're wrapping up, do you have any final thoughts you want to say about this? Any more quick bullet points?
Well, I'll start off with a shameless promotion. If you want to read Stargate Alternia, it is on Archive of Our Own, under my username, Callum Traveler. You can probably just look at Hiveswap or Homestuck and look for Act 6, Act 4, Chasing the World, and then just click back into the series through the Part 11 of Stargate Alternia link. I will advise you that it is over 1.5 million words and counting, and it is a daunting read. I am very hesitant to even go back and do a thorough editing pass of it, as I've said. But yeah, if you're willing to take the time to read it, yeah, it's there on Archive of Our Own. If you want to contact me or ask me questions, just leave a review. I'll get back to you. Other than that, I suppose you could probably message me on Twitter. I'm Callum Traveler there. But yeah, the only thing I also say is, please do not do an audio read of this. Your voice will go hoarse. Just please do not try and do a podfic or a sound book or whatever. If you do one, just limit it to Act 1. That's all. Just Act 1 is the only one you should ever try doing this with. Just trust me on this. Act 1 is the only one you should ever try doing an audio read of if you ever do an audio read, because you will just grow hoarse of it. Trust me, it is a lot of words.
It's quite a few, yeah. But yeah, so are there any projects you're working on right now? I know you mentioned the Friends and Fan Dub earlier on. You got anything else?
Beyond finishing up the story that I'm working on, I've been working off and on some original projects. One of them is called Mistrial, which is set in a fantasy world based around a detective agency called, guess what, Mistrial. And it kind of plays on the whole theme of gods being in the world. It's kind of a follow-on to Homestuck in that sense. Like it could have been what we got with the epilogues, sort of with you have the people, everyday people living in the world, dealing with the gods aware that the gods who created this world are still there and still around, even if some of them are dead or missing or what have you. And the overall arc of it was basically gonna, if I ever get it out the door, it definitely needs a whole lot of re-edits and whatnot. But the overall arc is kind of similar, I suppose. It's like it deals with my own idea of how a suburb ascension should work, like going to the god tiers. That's my idea. It kind of focuses around that, of how it should work, in my opinion. And it also, again, brings in the whole idea of parallel dimensions and stuff. I think you'll find that's a very common thread in my work. Alternate dimensions, other worlds. Other than that, the only other original project I have running in the background, I haven't published anything about this really, is something I'm calling World Commute. And it's basically the idea of what happens if that MMO world isekai thing that happens, the guy dies, he ends up in the other world. What happens if that door ends up being two-way and you're able to go back and forth? That's kind of the original inciting concept for it. But it's going to deal kind of with conspiracies and characters dealing with trauma and surviving and coping, and I got a couple trans characters in there too, so trans rep, woo.
Yeah. Okay, so there's going to be links to your Twitter, to your AO3, to anything else you decide to shoot at me in the description below. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. I've been dropping hints about you in enough episodes that it was just bound to happen eventually.
Yeah. Thank you to Philip, who said all that Stargate stuff, Stargate stuck stuff. That was really what kind of pushed me to get on this. So, hey,
yeah,
thumbs up.
Okay, yeah. And so after this, we're going to have an episode coming out on Saturday, and then it's going to be kind of vague, not sure what's happening in November yet, but I'll let you guys know as soon as I know. So thank you again for listening. Thank you again, Callum, for coming on and talking about this, and I will see you guys Saturday.
Bye!
This podcast's theme is Dirty Dirt Kenny and was created by Domi, who can be found on SoundCloud as Domino Thief. The art for the podcast was done by Abby, who you can find on Twitter at SpaceArby's. Unless it wasn't. Shout out to my patrons, Kansas Just Got Gayer and Jacob King. To become a patron and get episodes up to 5 days early along with other benefits, go to patreon.com/sociallyanxiousdragon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. You can find links to that and more in the episode's description, on the podcast's Twitter, JaxDoesHS, or on JaxDoesHomestuck.com. Please remember to rate this podcast on iTunes and share with your friends. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to be a little selfish.